I just want to welcome Mitch Silber, Executive Director of the Community Security Initiative, to open our session today. Mitch?
As you all can imagine, very busy times. We're trying to learn about the situation from this past Saturday as information continues to sort of trickle out. And I think most importantly, whatever we learn, we want to pass to you so you can make your institutions more secure. So, with that in mind, we sort of called an audible today. And in addition to talking about our prepared agenda with Dove and Ilya, we also are going to have Bill Hayes, who's our Westchester and Bronx Regional Security Manager, walk you through some of our early and initial takeaways from Colleyville that we think will be helpful to all of you. We're currently planning a bigger event with UJA and all synagogues and all schools, where we will have a more fulsome discussion of lessons learned from Colleyville. But this is a quick look based on not even 72 hours plus or minus since the incident. So with that, let me turn that over to Bill, and then we'll get into sort of our regularly scheduled programming.
Thank you. And, to Mitch's point, any conversation about what happened in Colleyville over the Shabbat weekend, it's not premature to talk about it, but it's fair to say that there's a lot more we have to learn. There's some things we know. There's some things we'd like to know right now that we just can't know yet. But knowing, from the inside out what the process looks like, there is a lot more that we can learn and will be learning. And based on the last few days, I know that our partners throughout the Jewish security community and our law enforcement partners are doing their very best to provide us with as much actionable information so that we can push that out to the community to continue our mission, which is an ever evolving mission to maintain and improve security at Jewish institutions. Colleyville is kind of the 300-pound gorilla in the room. We're going to touch on it, give you the quick and dirty before we move into today's presentation. And there are some things that we know. One of the big takeaways is it's important to reinforce the fundamentals, the basics of security fundamentals. The rabbi at Colleyville has been very forthcoming in talking about what he did and how it evolved, and that's going to be really informative as time goes on. And it just reminds us that the fundamentals are critical. We've got to continue to reinforce the security fundamentals with our staff, our congregants. And I always have used the phrase that security is really not a spectator sport. It requires full participation, and it's not something you do. It's something that's ongoing. You never get to the finish line when it comes to security. It's an evolving, ever-present duty for all of us to make sure that we're doing what we can to improve and maintain security. So this is a fluid situation. Some of the things we do know is that involving your board, having a security committee, those are all good things, and instilling a culture of security. And it seems like the congregation in Colleyville did that. They had a lot in their favor that lent itself to a successful outcome in terms of no hostages being injured. We know and we acknowledge, even as security professionals, that it's not all about hardening the target. You have to maintain a balance between being warm and welcoming and maintaining a safe and secure environment. And that's a slippery slope. And sometimes it's hard to define in one formula that, is magically applied to every institution and organization. That's locally driven in many ways. And every congregation, every organization has to decide where that balance is, but it's there. It has to be an ongoing discussion because they're not mutually exclusive. You have to be both in these environments. This is critical. For me, this is probably an area that I talk about the most. What's the one thing we can do? That's controlling access. Nobody that shouldn't be in your premises should be in your premises. And that's where it all starts. Not talking out of school, the rabbi has told the community how that individual got in. He didn't force his way in. He was admitted into the premises because the individual presented himself as a person in need, either homeless or in some type of distress, gained the confidence of the rabbi. And this brings up a number of points. We have to make sure that at the doorway, at the portal into the school, into the synagogue, into the office, that there is some, not just hardware, but process that prevents the wrong people from getting into that portal. And we like to talk about dividing the people arriving at your institution into buckets, the knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknowns. For instance, you have your regulars, you know who comes to work every day, you know who comes to Shabbat services every weekend, but sometimes there's a special event, a guest speaker, a bar mitzvah, a wedding, And you have people that are going to be present that should be there either as guests or maybe they're just not there every week. These are what we call the known unknowns, a little bit less familiar to us than the regulars, but they're still authorized to be there. We have to figure out a way through process to identify who they are before they're admitted into the building. And then you have the unknowns. This is the stranger that knocks on the door or the person that nobody knows and we don't know what they're doing there. And that kind of ratchets up the intensity of our screening. And it's important to develop a screening profile, a behavioral profile for each bucket. You know who belongs in your institution. Just like when I was a police officer, I know what vehicles belonged on the street at night. I know what people belonged in the neighborhood. I know who the business owners were. And I also knew who didn't belong in the neighborhood. And that in and of itself doesn't mean anything, but it should prompt further inquiry. I like to get into human behavior and talk about gut instincts. Each and every one of us has a primal sense that tells us, that's the voice in the back of your head that tells us when something's not right. In the news recently, we heard about a woman in New York City who was pushed in front of a subway train. Very unfortunate incident. But prior to that attack, there was another woman who made statements to the press and to the police that she saw this individual come up behind her, felt like there was something not right about him and changed her location. She moved out of the way. That's gut instinct. We can get way off into the weeds, but that's what I call the blink, right? Your gut tells you a lot. And it's very informative. The unfortunate part about society is that we've trained ourselves to ignore that instinct because we don't want to appear rude, we don't want to appear racist or not have good manners. And in a way, we have trained ourselves to ignore that instinct. Science has proven to trust your gut. If an individual presents themselves at your synagogue and says, "Help, I need some assistance," no problem. That's what you're there to do. That doesn't necessarily mean that they get the keys to the city. This could be one of those, no problem, we're going to help you, sit down here for a second before I let you in, we're going to call the police, or come into the vestibule out of the cold. But maybe they don't get past that second portal, which on the hardware side, we recommend that you have. We're going to talk way deeper on these things in future seminars, but remember that security really starts at the front door. And that is a theme that repeats itself in the real world over and over again. Not only do we want you to see something and say something, we want you to do something when you see something or feel something that's not right. 911 is always your first call, always. In a suspicious circumstance or an emergency, we want you to call 911. Following that, conditions permitting, we'd like you to reach out to your regional security manager. That information, contact information, including our cell phone numbers, is up on the screen now. There are a lot of resources that we can bring to bear, including, without getting too into the details, including some of the assistance we were able to provide on Saturday to the various authorities because there was somewhat of a New York nexus to what was going on out in Colleyville. And sometimes all it takes is one person knowing who to call, who to connect somebody else with. And that's a really important niche that we fit into, and we're unique because of that. So we really want to hear from you if it's safe to do so and contingent upon you calling 911 first. The incident in Colleyville was not an active shooter. It certainly could have been. That doesn't mean that active shooter training isn't relevant. The rabbi's actions, his heroic actions that terminated that incident, that allowed himself and the other two hostages to escape, was drawn from quote active shooter training that he and his congregants had received some months in the past. So although this was what we call a barricade or hostage situation, it certainly could have evolved at any moment into an active shooter situation. So the fundamentals of an active shooter incident still apply to an incident like what happened on Saturday. And the basics are, it's referred to in different ways: run, hide, fight, avoid, deny, defend. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that when confronted with a situation like that, the first thing you want to do is get out of it, put some distance between you and the threat. If that's not possible, you want to conceal yourself from the threat by hiding. And if that's not possible, or as what happened Saturday, conditions changed and the rabbi's gut told him things are not going well, something has changed, the situation is evolving into a potentially more dangerous matter, he acted and he fought off the offender by breaking his mental concentration for just a few moments that allowed him and his counterparts to escape. That's the fight. That's the call to action. That's the do something part of run, hide, fight. And of course, it's always important to know if you're caught up in a situation like this, what do you do when the cops get there? You don't want to get mistaken for being a bad guy. There's a lot that the police have to do. The police are walking into a situation where you have more information they do because you're in it. You have the knowns, the cop don't have, all they're looking at is unknowns. So remember, when the police arrive, to stay calm, Do what they tell you to do, show them your hands, avoid distracting the police by screaming, yelling, pointing, and that's going to go a long way to maintaining your safety, because that's going to give the police a chance to do what they have to do. And of course, if you're on the outside or some way able to get to the phone and call 911, make sure that you're able to give the police the location of the shooter or the offender, in this case, the hostage taker, how many bad guys there are, what they look like. What does it look like they're armed with, or what do they say that they're armed with? In this case, the individual said he had explosives, even though it turns out he did not, but he did have a handgun. And how many people are there? How many potential victims are at the location? Finally, back to the fight part. I don't have any training. I don't have anything in my hands or special equipment that I can use to defend myself. Yes, you do. Everyday household objects like chairs, fire extinguishers, and some of the examples up on the screen, if they weren't so serious, they would almost be comical. It just shows that a commitment to action can save lives. On Saturday, the rabbi threw a chair. Back in June 2017 in London, there was an individual that rammed pedestrians and pulled out knives and went into a pub. And that was a mistake, because everybody in the pub wound up using what they had available, pint mugs and bar stools, and were able to bring this offender down. It worked. Again, if it wasn't so serious, it would be comical. In December of 2019, a shooter was subdued by using a narwhal tusk. This is a big sea animal with a huge tusk on the front of its nose, and was able to fend off a shooter with a narwhal tusk and a fire extinguisher. And of course, in your office right now where you're sitting, look around for a moment. Heavy books, chairs, pencils, letter openers, all those things can be used to defend you. Your coffee cup in an emergency. You just have to have the wits about you, think about it in advance, and have the wherewithal to act. This is a serious call to action. The summary of all that I've talked about is kind of picture this flow chart of things that happen. You definitely want to create that culture of security in your institution while maintaining the ever important balance between being welcoming and warm, but protecting your staff, your members, and anybody that depends on you and trust you to maintain their safety. Make sure that unauthorized people don't get in and the good people are able to get inside and stay inside. Please stay in touch and contact your regional security manager, but in an emergency, call 911 first. Know and think about your options in advance. It's very difficult to come up with solutions in a crisis under stress. If you've rehearsed these things mentally or as a group in a formal training situation in advance, your odds of survival improve. And always, always be prepared to fight like your life depends on it, because it really and truly does. A bad guy motivated by hate, by violence, is not going to cut you any slack, and you really can't do that for them. As much as in our hearts, we want to see the good in everybody. So we will certainly be covering this more as time evolves and as we learn more, and CSI will be pushing out, along with our other partners, informative presentations on this very subject. So with that, Dove, I believe you're going to start pushing your own slides and we'll get on to today's agenda. Thanks, everybody.
Gotcha. Good morning. Thank you, Bill. Very important information. Obviously, a tough weekend for everyone. And obviously, our goal is to prevent any of these things even forever occurring, but being able to be best prepared if they ever do. While the slides come up real quickly, we've geared these sessions, right? They're specifically for the procurement process of the grants, right? To install your hardware. Maybe you have some funding for training and some planning, but in general, it's mostly for hardware. And the big piece we can realize is that's a piece of the puzzle. Obviously, hardware goes a long way, but even your hardware should, complement your policies, your procedures. Bill mentioned your access control, and hardening only goes so far. You could have a great door, but if you don't understand when and how people should come in and out of your facility, how much security have you really provided? If your front door is upgraded to a bullet resistant, forced entry resistant door, but your back door is wide open, is the whole picture together. So it's all these pieces: the training, the awareness, the buy-in. But I digress, and to get back to our regular programming to ensure we can use these grants the best possible. Before I jump in, we started with, for those of you who were on when we first started, we had our opening survey to ask where you were in the process. Obviously, this, like we say each week, it helps us understand your needs so we can continue to tailor these programs. But the reality is there's a lot of work behind these grants, as you're seeing. And as we try to help you really create a professional and effective security program, there can even be more things that aren't technically in your contract, right? In Appendix A1, DHSCS likes to refer to. So from the survey, you see that we are making progress. Every single one of you is making progress. We're moving. And then that's kind of was the crux behind one of the big pieces behind starting this training is for us to recognize if we can keep moving one foot in front of the other, we're in a great place. We definitely don't want to get to this a month, 2 months before your contract expires. It's just going to be that much more impossible to get anything done, let alone an effective security program. So for those of you who are returning, and definitely for the new attendees, we like to start with a recap. There's a lot of information done each week. It's too much to go through each time because we want to get onto our new material, but we like to cover our core pieces. So what have we started with? What are the big pieces? You all know my opening line at this point. Your DHSCS rep is your go-to answers for your real technical questions. We can obviously guide you, consult you, advise you, fill in the gray areas, but when at the end of the day you need to make a change, you have a real technical question, you got to get that response, that official response from your rep. Very importantly, and again, and this one will definitely be up there every week, is keeping your records. One of the last DHSCS webinar themselves talked in equipment management form and documents. We will talk in later weeks. It's way too early to get into that for the actual equipment you install. But at this process, you should be keeping records of your notes, of the things you attended, especially for those of you who need to do your quarterly progress report and e-grants, right? If you had notes, it's easier to refer to it of what we did. Who'd you speak to? Your RSM, the DHSCS rep, you wrote your advertisement, et cetera, et cetera. Just keep those notes. And once you start getting into the bid process, you definitely want to keep those communications. You definitely want to collect all the bids for when you do get audited, you do get visited. So right now is the time to work on your bid package, your RFP, right? So whether you're already up to an advertisement or whether you're waiting on your EHP approval, if you're a nonprofit security grant program recipient, right? If you have an NSGP, you submitted your EHP, they had the deadline a few weeks ago. We're in almost a waiting pattern. This is the perfect time to design this. And that's kind of why we filled these few weeks with this information so you can create a good package. We're not going to cover everything in one session, but if you get those big pieces, the project manager, your cover letter, understanding what you want with your program will go a long way. And then just real quickly, remember, if you have a project, if any of your specific projects, so access control, cameras, door hardening, if any of the individual projects are over $10,000, you need to advertise. So that's going to be most of your projects. And ideally, if any projects you have, you probably should just follow the same process to not confuse yourself. But definitely for over $10,000, you're required by the procurement rules to advertise in a newspaper. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the next slide. Again, we've talked about this over a couple of weeks. You know that it's an MWBE, the Minority and Women Business Enterprise, right, is a requirement of the hate crimes grant, a requirement. There are a few ways to work around this, but once you advertise and start talking to vendors, make sure your first 30% of your award, $15,000 of a $50,000 award, is allocated to an MWBE. In this part, we talked about earlier, keeping your notes and records. As you search the MWBE portal, as you reach out and try to communicate with MWBEs, document your efforts. Whether you took it was a phone call, take notes of it. If it was an email, save that email. Whatever it is, because if unfortunately you cannot find enough vendor or not a good enough vendor, you want to have that documentation in place that you made the effort in case you need to get towards a waiver. But let's not talk about that yet. Let's first try to do the process the right way. Always get 3 bids. We get this question, I couldn't get enough bidders, or even the state recognizes when they do their audit that sometimes only 1 bid was reviewed. So it's not just getting the 3 bidders, you also need to evaluate with your scoring matrix that we presented previously, and I think will come up again. You need to evaluate all the bidders, right? You don't want to ever knock one out or have a favor that you go with. You need to follow the process right, and the 3 bids is a strict requirement. So when you do get those bids, we're not really there yet. Evaluate your bids by committee, right? It's not one person. It should be multiple people reviewing the committee by that predetermined scoring criteria, which you put into the matrix, which we presented, right? And there's no one way. We have that example, and your RSMs can help you with it, but that's how you should score it once it comes in, especially a sealed bid process, which is over any grant over 10K. Don't review those bids yet once you receive them. together as committee, that's when you start looking at what you received and you evaluate them based on your criteria. Very importantly, connect with your RSM, whether it's for trainings and materials that Bill mentioned previously, it's for the documents and templates that Ilya and myself refer to during these trainings, or just other guidance. Please make sure, partner with your RSM. That's what we're here for. And if we don't know the answer, we'll get you the answer or help you move along. So I'm just going to touch real quickly on last week we spoke a little bit about advertisement. We showed some templates. We showed the DHSES template, right? So it's not something that we made up. We're not going to go through it today with you. It's in the previous session, but your RSM has access to it. Your DHSES rep can provide this language, but I've worked with RSMs to really design with your committee, with you, whoever it is, to make this advertisement language. So that's how we want to partner with you. Importantly is you have to understand the appropriate publication for your ad, right? Make sure it's not in a specific religious periodical, a special interest group, right? It really needs to be something that covers the physical area broadly, right? It's not going to specifically target one community or one group. That's a requirement of it. You can also put it online, put it to other groups, right? To get the most bids possible. You can supplement, but for the requirement, it has to be in kind of that broad paper. It doesn't have to be the New York Times, or it doesn't have to be something that covers the whole city, but it has to be at least be broad in that fair and balanced procurement effort. And again, this ad obviously there will be a little bit of a cost on the organization. It should not be more than a few $100s, if even. While I have you, the ad must be posted for how many days or weeks? Do we know? Let's see if anyone puts in the chat. That's an important part. Or fingers. The answer is the requirement is, thank you, Faye, 3 days. That's your requirement. So meaning if the ad will be up for a week, that suffices. But if it's only be 1 day, you need to obviously get 3 days of it to meet the requirement. So at this stage, we should be finding that newspaper. We should be putting the language together, right? It takes a little bit of back and forth to communicate with the advertisement section of the newspaper. So it's not a one-shot deal. So make sure you start communicating, and then we can put the language up. As we've talked about, you've seen the Q&As that come up sometimes. We don't always get bids. So will putting it out there longer necessarily help you? It may not. Again, partner with your RSM. But the requirement is for 3 days, so at least we got that going. You have that advertisement, and you can share that advertisement and make sure people are pulled back in to your procurement process. So speaking of the procurement process, if your contract's not executed or your EHP is not approved, you really should not be communicating with vendors too much, and definitely you shouldn't at all. But if you've identified some, we talked about it a little bit last week, how you can start finding vendors, reviewing vendors without communicating with them. Now, once you do have your advertisement posted in the paper, right, it's an actual ad, you can now tell the vendors, hey, please respond to this ad, ensure they're working their way back into your procurement process, right? That anonymous email that doesn't necessarily say who you are, but then you can collect it for your committee to review at that stage. Really, and very important to say, when you do ask them to respond to your ad, hey, our ad's up there, can you please review? And if you're interested, once you email us back, we'll send the RFP package. Don't get ahead of the process. Don't say, hey, by the way, we want you. Here's the information, the inside scoop. It's tempting. Maybe we worked with them before, but we have seen locations that got dinged for this. If you're going to communicate, whether it's a current vendor you use, a new vendor you identified, whether it's you work with your RSM and we help identify, let's always move them back into the process so we're not giving anyone preferential treatment. It's very important. And just a reminder, and I'll close with this, don't contact the vendors till your RFP has been advertised. That's your go point, meaning your contract's executed, both the contract, both EHP if required. You've done your advertisement requirement. Don't contact them till you put your advertisement in, and then hopefully through these sessions, you have the materials you want to share the RFP, the specifics of your project. All right, see a question real quick, and I'll turn it over to Ilya. What does ding mean? Not a technical term. Every year, I've said it over the past few weeks, DHSES gets more serious. There definitely are examples where if you did not follow the procurement process, you won't be reimbursed. That's kind of the worst case, right? Being that this is a reimbursement-based contract, you're laying out your funds. If you didn't follow these processes, which we're trying to really bring home and give you the details of it so we don't find ourselves in a corner and stay ahead of it, you can potentially not be reimbursed for specific elements of your project if you didn't follow the process. So I hope that answered that. With that, I will turn it over to Ilya. I know a lot of important and great information is coming today. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dov. And thank you all for joining today. I'll try to run through this quickly. And please remember that you can always go back to our recorded content. Okay, so the way we're doing this is, as you can see, whatever we're sharing, please don't be concerned that all this information is presented once and you're not going to see it again. Everything goes up on our website, and you can go back to previous webinars, and the same with this one. So we're trying to limit the volume of note taking that you're doing, even though note taking is always a good idea. This is the slide that I presented during the last webinar, and this is just a structure for RFP package preparation. I'll try to break it out in a few, I guess, more specific slides as I move along, but just to familiarize yourself, very important to have a project manager. I'll explain why that is on the next slide. Reviewing the approved EHP and isolating scopes of work. And I know that it causes sometimes a lot of confusion in terms of, well, what scope should be combined with some other scope, or how do we isolate it? What does that mean, right? So again, I've listed here some of the individual scope elements that you might need to start isolating, and certainly please coordinate with your RSM if you are confused about something, if you're not sure what can be awarded to the same contractor. So for example, what we notice is that let's say a window film might be in the same package together with, let's say, security technologies, right? And that might not be the right fit because window film vendors are different, and they often don't have anything to do with security technologies like video surveillance and access control, stuff like that. Next, creating a project schedule, right? I'll give you some examples about that. Engaging with manufacturers instead of vendors. Manufacturers are far better in terms of explaining how their products work. They're also far more knowledgeable about, I guess, implementation and the procurement process. How do you get that type of product? And they also maintain very close watch over authorized dealers of their products. Sometimes they will remove some dealers for either poor sales or poor behavior. And so it's very important to check with manufacturers if you're trying to learn about products rather than integrators. So deciding what additional documents will help to clarify your scope that should be included in the RFP is very important. And here we listed a few examples. And obviously, we showed during the last webinar how you can prepare an RFP cover letter. Please help yourself to take a look at the last webinar where we demonstrated a sample. It's not a sample that fits everyone, but we went over some of the key elements. It's important to conduct your pre-qualification of potential bidders because, as I mentioned during our last webinar, sometimes there will be a lot of negative information about bidders. I've seen companies filing for liquidation in the middle of a project, go bankrupt, right? Not able to deliver their services. And some of that information is available up front. They may have already several either court judgments or some other negative reputational issues and financial issues that may prevent them from executing a good project for you. So that's something for you to consider. Let's move on in the interest of time. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm a big proponent of basically assigning a project manager. And here I'm listing some of the key factors that all roll up to this role. Right? What are the key areas that the project manager helps you accomplish? But before I go into them, I just wanted to say thank you to those who replied to the first poll that we posted in the beginning of this webinar. I noticed that a few of you already have a project manager. Very glad to see that. And like Dov said, we're definitely moving forward step by step. I'm very happy to see that you're thinking in those terms. Having having a single point of contact who can manage all the moving parts on the project and then interact with your internal team and then with external representatives is going to save you from a lot of future headaches. So just to cover a few points about project management, right? So from left to right, needless to say, a project manager will be and can be in charge of your scope control. A vendor may suggest, well, you know what, I want to suggest that you do something else at your facility, but your grant can only stretch so far, and your approved DHP also is already registered with your granting organization. So whatever vendors suggest may not be a good fit for your organization at this point in time. So having a firm position on what scope you're trying to execute and maintaining that position and explaining it clearly is the role of the project manager. And they control that not just in the beginning of your process, once you start advertising and sending out RFP packages, but throughout the entire project. Because vendors like getting change orders. Change order means additional money. Change order means that they point to something and they say, well, we never included it in our original proposal, so you got to pay me more for this if you want it, right? Or they start suggesting some additional bells and whistles, right? Again, the project manager is the person who looks at the original scope and coordinates with awarded contractor as to what needs to be done and kind of holds their feet to the fire about executing on the originally agreed scope so that you don't end up having to, I guess, go through this additional process where you have to approve additional funds. Where are you going to find it? Is it even a good fit for our facility? Somebody will have to make decisions about that. So that causes additional delays. A project manager also is responsible for coordinating a lot of different perspectives and coordinating a lot of different tasks. I can't imagine that a single person, a project manager, would be executing all the tasks on the project. I'm sure that you understand that. But that I'm not only talking about kind of what vendors need to do or what the awarded contractor needs to do. It's also coordination with the internal team. Sometimes it's a question of, okay, what's a good schedule for us to start or, mobilize the vendor to get the job done? And there are a lot of stakeholders on your team that may say, well, you know what, we're on a day camp. So during those hours, we can't have the vendor work at the facility. Or you might have multiple scheduled activities. Or maybe if you were planning to do work, let's say during the week, you might need to shift to the weekend. And guess what? Vendors also charge extra for weekend work sometimes, right? So off hours, they will charge premium labor rates, for example. So I'm sure many of you have seen that, but a project manager helps coordinate those activities and many other decisions that need to be made along the project. And going back to what everyone's been saying, Dov's been saying this repeatedly throughout pretty much every webinar, and several guest speakers went to the great length of explaining that a good project manager knows how to collate and put together documentation. And how to do that consistently throughout the entire project. From the very beginning, when decisions are being made about, okay, we're doing the project, we got awarded, we got the approved DHP, what are the next steps, right? From that point on, project manager can begin organizing that documentation. Next is the execution. The execution, by that I mean simply that you've awarded the contract to a vendor, and this company now must execute it in a way that meets your expectations. What do I mean by that? Dov, a couple of days ago, sent me a photo of a security closet where and he told me, he said, Ilya, you're probably going to have a heart attack. And I said, no, nothing surprises me anymore. I've seen it all, right? And when I saw it, I wasn't surprised. I was just very, very sad and upset about that. The fact that in 2022, this shoddy work continues. It was a security closet from one of the peer facilities, I suppose somewhere in the New York metro area, right? That had just a complete soup of all sorts of signal devices sitting in that security closet, all dusty, wires everywhere. Like there was zero care about installing anything. And yet the facility thinks that they have good security. So the contractor failed. There probably wasn't very good project management. And there's now false sense of security, something that actually Bill started with when he was talking about the incident in Texas. Okay, we could be operating under the assumption that everything is great. But let me tell you, without good project management, you likely will have a greater false sense of security than the actual security present at your facility. Moving on. Okay, so now to get into the details of how would you consider preparing and reviewing and isolating scopes on the basis of your agreed AHP, on the basis of communicating with your internal stakeholders, right? And also sequencing, right? So sequencing is very important. I mentioned it before because sometimes, and David brought this up, a couple of webinars ago, right? Where somebody says, well, I want to put access control in. Well, how good are your doors? Well, my doors also need to be replaced. Well, you're not putting access control in until your doors have been replaced. So there's a sequencing issue right there, right? Or for example, I need to add more cameras, but wait a second, I have a video recorder that's very old. So that needs to be replaced. Well, why are you putting in cameras first without having replaced your video recorder if that's not in scope for the current project? So all of those things require some understanding and sequencing. So here we are giving you a very simple model for how to think about scope isolation, right? In this case, I basically took what I wrote in my previous slide and basically broke it out in a matrix, right? And you can go through either horizontally and see different scopes. And I did include guards and training because those are also services that you need to procure. And I also vertically aligned some of the key factors that a project manager should be aware of when they're isolating scopes and also thinking about, okay, what budget am I allocating here? When am I placing ads? When am I RFP being released? And you better release RFPs at the same time on the same date to everyone. So what is my anticipated award date, right? So again, not to dwell too much on this, this is a very simple model for you to start thinking about how to isolate your scopes. I've dealt with a facility not so long ago who they did not have an organized internal decision about who was going to lead the project. They were thinking that each individual on the team was going to take on their own smaller scope, like partial scope of a project, and then they couldn't reach agreement. So we had to have a conversation about making it a little bit more formal and really thinking about a project management role and also thinking about how do you isolate your scopes? What does that look like? How am I going to sequence it? And the best additional resource for you is always your RSM, right? Please don't forget that if you get stuck somewhere, right? If this seems like a complete mystery to you, right? Even though you can see this model, you can copy and create a spreadsheet from this, right? Please just talk to your RSM. And I'm really hopeful that you will have a better understanding of how to move on, okay? So let's move on, one moment. I apologize, I need to move this, a couple of controls. Now, I am very certain that many of you understand simple project scheduling. Here I am showing you a very quickly put together project schedule. It's a spread across 10-week span. It could be a longer span, could be a shorter span. I'm just giving you an example, okay? But please understand that once you've created a visual model for what you're doing, it's much easier to then, first of all, have a historic record of what you're doing and what steps are assigned in what sequence. So for example, here from week 1 to week 3, we're in the bid process. Then I suppose by the end of week 3, you've awarded the project. That means that you will start a contractor mobilization process. We can go into details of mobilization perhaps at a later time, but in short, this is when you're coordinating with the vendor, like the signing of last formalities, maybe, have a contract in place, and maybe having your DISHIS rep or state rep verify that you're good to proceed, right? Mobilization means that the contractor also needs to commit to a starting date, right? Because schedules change. Everybody has different types of, commitments. So alignment of schedule is also part of this mobilization. Of course, sometimes you may have exterior work, sometimes you may have interior work, or both. And that also requires some sort of sequencing. Here I'm showing that exterior work starts first and then interior work continues. Maybe the other way around. Coordination of those activities with the vendor, with your internal team, will be very important. And keep in mind, not only are you coordinating with the vendor, but you're also constantly checking your own organization's schedule. What if this day doesn't work, or, for interior work? What can we do something else, right? So develop those steps, that sequence of actions for your project in advance, so that you don't have to think every day about, well, what are they going to do today? And where can they access? Okay. And of course, please remember, a lot of failures occur if proper handover from a vendor that installed all of your required devices, upgrades, if that handover does not happen properly, where the vendor says, okay, we're done, and they walk away. And you're left with what? You don't have training. You don't understand what was upgraded and where. The vendor hasn't provided you what's called as-builts, which demonstrate what they've actually upgraded, what products they used, what locations they touched, how they function, right? So none of those questions or answers have been given to your team. So how can you possibly begin using those upgrades or rely on those upgrades? So handover is when your team works with the vendor and checks whether they've met your expectations. Now, of course, there is a different degree of technical knowledge across our community. Please, at points when you feel like some things are a little bit too intimidating to double check, reach out to your RSM and ask some questions, okay? I've seen where facilities are able to afford a small budget and hire a consultant just for handover, so that they could walk the facility together with the vendor and help bridge the understanding or lack of understanding between the vendor and the client organization in terms of what it is that they're receiving, and organize what's called either a defect rectification list or a punch list. Those terms are used in construction in New York City, and basically tell vendor, well, you failed here, you didn't finish this work, or you didn't clean this, or this camera is off, or this door handle is dangling, or you didn't screw this on properly. All of those things, right, if unaddressed, cause you to have false sense of security. And they will fail more quickly if you haven't addressed that with the vendor. So, engagement with manufacturers. I'm just listing a couple of items for you to consider as to why it's very important to consider manufacturers versus vendors. First and foremost, manufacturers have a much better understanding how to communicate with you about their products. They have much deeper knowledge. They have engineers within their organizations who can speak with you about how their products actually function, right? And give you almost like a crash course, right? To a lay person about how does this product work. They've done this multiple times. They can provide very clear and guided product literature about what you're about to invest in. They can do demonstrations. I've had multiple demonstrations set up for clients where I, as a consultant, had to develop the initial set of questions to ask the manufacturer. So I was helping a client team to prepare some of their questions about their expectations. Right? Would this product meet my expectations? So demonstrations are free. Okay, you pay nothing for it. You just invest a little bit of time to speak with the manufacturer about what it is that how their products work. Manufacturers also have very good access to lists of local vendors who are reliable and who are also, in some cases, must be authorized continually and reauthorized to be install this manufacturer's products. Okay, dealership verification also is done with manufacturers. If you're buying an access control system, okay, you will absolutely have to deal with an authorized dealer. If the company that's selling you a certain access control system does not have that authorization, they shouldn't be selling that product. And the same goes for a few other types of products. For example, even mechanical locks. There are authorized dealers for certain brands of mechanical locks. They just don't install anything else. They only deal with that type of lock. Okay, so engineering support. Again, manufacturers are willing to offer free engineering support if you're looking to understand how the product would solve your needs. And how it could upgrade your security. So they do provide engineering support. And of course, product support. Sometimes a vendor is difficult to reach. Okay, it happens on occasion. In New York, everybody is busy, right? They finish the job, and then you basically, sometimes good luck reaching the vendor for some assistance because they're moving on to their next product. But manufacturers do have product support, and they're happy to speak with you when you begin using their products. Bidder pre-qualification. So we had multiple questions, and I think Dov did a very good job replying to them. And we're trying to also organize an ongoing list of FAQs or that would be available on our website, right? We already gave some ideas in our previous webinars that occasionally all you need to do is call your peer organizations in the community and just ask, hey, who did this for you? Okay, hopefully JCRC will be providing further support because I know that there's an effort ongoing at the moment to help flesh out some of the well-regarded providers and integrators, door hardware contractors, and so on that have served the community well. Also, when you pre-qualify, you certainly will be, it would be important to understand the company information, how long they've been in the business, and what kind of, I guess, references they have. That's one of the other points that I mentioned. Most importantly, in my personal experience, have been bios of people you'll be dealing with. Okay, if somebody says, okay, I'm going to give you this project manager, they're going to be overseeing the project implementation. Let me talk to that person. Okay, I want to see what kind of character they have. Are they a good communicator? Is this person a good listener? Is this person responsive? Are they punctual? All of those things we would vet other contractors for other types of needs. The same applies to security vendors. Okay, financial health of a company is very important because they could go bankrupt in the middle of the project. Okay, it's not unheard of. I worked on a very large project that in New York City, and the people who were running the project, because of the way they structured their payments to contractors, they bankrupted two large electrical firms in New York City. So there could be some issues. So make sure you are aware of how healthy the company is financially. Workmanship examples. I mentioned this terrible photo that Dov shared with me, right? Let them share with you how is it that, that they do the work. And from previous projects, and they could connect those photos with the references that they provide to you. So you can actually ask their previous clients about, hey, they shared a photo with me along with the reference. Is that accurate? Did they do a good job? So, and of course, peer feedback. We started with that. I want to end with that. We're a very large community. There's a lot of connections going on. If it's not JCRC, there will be, I'm sure, many other people in the community from other facilities that who may be able to give you some answers, okay, as to how to pre-qualify, what kind of qualities are you looking for in a vendor, and so on. So please don't be intimidated by this, but just don't leave this, don't put this aside. Make this one of the steps. I mentioned how the pre-bid meeting for the selected bidders is very important. Here are some very simple rules to follow. Allocate 3 hours. I'm not saying you got to sit at the table for 3 hours, but you'll be having a conversation, walking them through your needs, but also likely we'll have a walk around the facility. So don't short yourself on the time spent answering questions, clarifying information, because what you want to avoid is confusion during the project. Because if there's confusion during the project, it costs real dollars. It will generate change orders. Well, I didn't hear it that way, or you didn't tell me, there's no evidence, I didn't know, and I'm going to charge you for it. Okay, so please remember, the more you clarify, the more time you invest before you receive the bids, the cleaner the bids will be, the more understandable they will be, the more you'll be able to level them, and you will reduce or eliminate the number of change orders, let's say, or additional charges during the project. It would be useful to have at least 2 people from your team. Why? Because one person is talking, another one is taking notes. It's that simple. Okay. As you can see, how do we present our webinars, right? I'm not the only one driving this, right? It's impossible for me to click all the buttons and move all things around, right? So we help each other, right? Assume the same approach. At least 2 people from your team who can back each other up. One takes notes, one talks, and they switch roles. All bidders for a specific isolated scope should be at your pre-bid meeting at the same time and at the same place. Now, some bidders may not show up. Okay, put a check mark to find out why. Okay, if they say we're too busy, just send us the RFP, we'll reply. Do you want to deal with that type of contractor? Okay, so that in and of itself is already a good indicator that that will help you make your final award choice. Project introduction and RFP document review is required during these meetings, because you don't want to be walking around people and just pointing at things and saying, I need this here and I need that there. First, sit people down, explain to them from the 30,000-foot view, what is it that you're doing? Then go into your documentation that you shared with them. What's the RFP, right? Here's what we're doing. You can literally read off of your RFP cover letter if you want, okay? And you can open up, literally print out, or have on the screen your EHP and walk your prospective bidders through the documentation, and have the RFP package available. If somebody has questions about anything, it's better to address it during the meeting, right? Of course, questions and answers goes without saying, very important. Give the prospective bidders time to ask you any clarifying questions, because while there certainly is a process and time period after this pre-bid meeting for them to ask you questions, which is called RFI, request for information, and you should give yourselves and the vendors about a week's time to offer that exchange. Q&A during the pre-bid meeting, it probably sets the right tone. And of course, as I mentioned, site walkthrough. And the site walkthrough could be done based on your EHP. Just have the document printed with you and just say, okay, we're at this location, please everybody take a look. Or some facilities prefer to mark up their set of floor plans and just have annotations there and just literally take a guided tour together with using that document. Okay, the more notes you have with you, the better. The more clear you are about your needs, what you expect, what you want from the contractors, because a lot of your facilities are they require historic preservation, and so the work has to be done very carefully. And in some areas, it's impossible to do that work in order not to ruin certain historic attributes of your building. You got to be able to demonstrate that and then share that with the bidders. So there was a question, and we did share a sample of a standardized set of bid forms. We're not saying that this is the only or the best sample of how to do that. However, we're simply saying that you should drive the way in which bidders present you their proposals from the unit pricing perspective, from information about products, labor rates, any miscellaneous equipment, right? So all of that needs to be broken out so that in the same way, using standardized forms so that you can actually level the bids. I mentioned an example where I had a project where one contractor wrote one letter with a lump sum number, and that's all they did. They said, we're going to install your system for, let's say, $500,000. Okay, I don't know what goes into that $500,000. So how can I possibly compare that with someone who's giving me a very detailed spreadsheet? I'm not leveling anything. Okay, so don't end up in that situation. You have to, if you have to level, if you have to compare apples to apples, then make sure you have apples and apples, not apples and oranges. So bid leveling has two components: qualitative component, because, and to give Dov credit, I'll show you the scoring matrix. There are qualitative components. If the behavior of the project manager in front of me from a specific vendor is nasty, I don't want to work with them. It's very simple. Okay. If they don't take any notes, I don't want to work with them. If they haven't asked a simple question and half of the meeting are staring at their phone, I don't want to work with them because they're not going to do a good job. They're nonchalant about it. They don't care. All they want is to just show up, tick a box, and then make a couple of dollars. That's not the type of vendor that you're looking for. So there's a qualitative component to it. There is also a very specific quantitative component. Obviously, did they promise to supply the right number of devices? Okay, I've seen where I'm looking at two bid proposals, very well put together into spreadsheets and everything, standardized forms, but one bidder says, I'm going to give you 20 cameras, and another bidder says, I'm going to give you 35. And my EHP says it's 27. So everybody's wrong. So I have to go back to all the bidders and say, guys, what were you looking for? You didn't ask any questions, but you didn't use the right numbers. So that is the quantitative method. And you also obviously are looking at prices, right? If my unit price for the same model camera from two vendors is $500 different one to the other, why is that, right? What's going on here? So that's a significant difference. If it's a couple of dollars different, then okay, well, that's all right. I can move on. But if it's a significant difference, I got to wonder. Same product, vendors get probably very similar discounts from the manufacturers. What's going on? So completeness, accuracy, and clarity of the submitted bids will help you level. If it's just a letter with a lump sum number, you're not leveling. Like I said, company information and experience, right, can be compared with the humans that you saw during your pre-bid meeting, right? For example, if they change a project manager on you and they say, well, you know what, the person who showed up, who said that they were going to project manage, is not the same person that we're going to propose for the project. Wait, can we talk to that person? Because we don't know them, right? That's not the person who showed up. So please just pay attention to those details, right? Company information and experience, like I said, references, past projects, workmanship photos, compared, you can make a couple of calls, not difficult, just investment of time. That is, again, where a project manager's role really helps you move those things forward. unit prices, labor rates, equipment, and hardware quality. You may find, for example, that somebody will still list banned products in their proposals. One vendor was assuring me, he said, Ilya, it's not going to be a problem. Don't worry, because it's only for government facilities. I'm like, you don't understand. You didn't read the documents right, because this is a government grant. So don't try to put banned products into this paperwork, into this bid, because my client facility will suffer. They will not get reimbursed for what you're proposing. So that's very important. And sometimes people will put in the cheapest devices in order to kind of increase the quantity of devices, but the overall quality of the system will be very poor. So please pay attention to that as well. Lead times. Everybody right now is suffering from supply chain issues. I have a project that's been delayed by 3-4 months because of lead times for certain sets of equipment, right? Prices change, shipping prices also change, lead times therefore will be affected. So when you're planning your schedule, please make sure you take that into consideration and coordinate with the vendor to give you some commitments as to when things will arrive. So you would know in advance what lead times you should be expecting and plan your schedule accordingly. I like to look at my leveling of bids in terms of value for money. Am I getting the right team, the right communicators, the right listeners who will work with me, who understand how to implement, who've done this many, many times before, who are nice people to deal with? And in addition, am I getting the right system that will, or the right set of upgrades that will meet my needs? Those are the things that matter very much to me. I had an integrator that I no longer recommend to anyone. They didn't really do a good job in terms of their communication style. They were very terse, very discourteous, and that was very evident throughout the whole process. And then they also did a number on the bidding. They basically disclosed that they were being asked by another bidder to actually be their subcontractor, even if they lost the bid. So there's a lot of stuff you can learn if you have coordination in place and if you engage with the bidders. Thank you to Dov. This is the copy, an example of a typical bid scoring matrix. You can take a look across the board as to what categories you can add or to remove categories that are important to you, but this is our suggestion, okay? I'm not going to dwell on this, or if you want to take a screenshot, please do, but this will be recorded so you can get back to it later. Okay, so then we're done. Questions and answers, and thank you for your patience. I appreciate it, and I will turn it over to Terry to walk us through the questions and answers section, unless I see Dov wanted to add something, and please others pitch in. Go ahead, Dov.
Thank you, Ilya. Always amazing stuff, and I think we're really putting together a good program for everybody. Just to clarify one thing you're saying, right? We're talking about there's two project managers. There's the project manager on your own team in-house, navigating the whole process, and there's also the project manager from a vendor who's going to be kind of your rep. So I just wanted to clarify two different people. But a couple other things I wanted to add, and not to steal Ilya's thunder. He mentioned earlier on in one of his early slides about, when a vendor says they're going to do something and it's not completed, or you have that a separate person walk through to everything was completed. If you have a good RFP developed, if you have spelled out what you're expecting, that holds them to the truth, that holds them to the table. Ilya's told me multiple examples, and maybe he can share even a few, where you just say, hey, you forgot to install such and such, or you did this not according to how we requested in the documents that you received. They'll come back to the table like, you're right. And instead of charging you $5,000 for a server over the price, it was included in their cost. And fortunately, sometimes I'm sure it'll work out better than others, and I'll let Ilya add if he wants to add anything to that. Anything on that note?
Yes, so that pertains in some cases to electronic systems like video surveillance, access control, intrusion detection, but it also pertains to hardware, to door hardware. For example, a vendor may have sold you a bunch of upgrades for your doors, like better hinges or maybe even door replacements, right? And when those products arrive, right, the door may not fit the frame, or it might be bent, or it might be in a shape that just is not workable, it's not usable, right? Or the hardware that they put on the door doesn't meet your needs, right? And it doesn't meet the documentation you shared with them, right? The more clear you are, the more specific you are about what you're looking for. And please don't be shy to ask for help. When you're preparing your documentation, our team, JCRC team, can always add a few suggestions about how to make your RFP package as clear as possible so that later on you could use it as the verification document, almost like a checklist, right? Did you do this? We asked for this, right? But you didn't do it. Okay, so why? You can't charge me more for it, so you got to come back and get it done, right? So this is where those two project managers, one on your side and the other one on the vendor side, have to work together to solve those issues. But thank you, Dov, for bringing that up.
And last point I want to share before we go to the poll and the Q&As, a lot of this stuff, perhaps easier said than done, but to create a formalized and especially a fair procurement process and to design a solid and effective security program, it takes work, right? I'm sure even when you first got your security committee together to even get an assessment done, to even start talking about security, right? There's different opinions, there's different interests. It's all over the board, and you kind of got to navigate and wrestle that. I'm going to share our own example, the JCRC offices, right? We're upgrading some security programs for our offices, and even amongst the group of, well, it's a combination of security professionals and executives and lay leadership. Everyone has a different approach. Sometimes you're only going to focus on the dollars, and sometimes you're going to focus on the convenience. And how do you marry all those things? So don't think that, oh, well, people are pushing back on this process or people want this. Keep them involved. Keep that momentum, because it's not that it's super easy, but it's the way to keep it going. And we all learn from going through. So even ourselves in our own offices, we have to navigate these processes and to ensure an effective security program. If we take the wrong inputs or don't really follow the guidelines to the end, and we have this great door that doesn't lock except for overnight, right? And it's open anytime during the day anyways. Like what have we really created here? Just for a simple basic example. So make sure, recognize you got to lower your shoulders sometimes and push through. But we're presenting a lot of the tools that I've even taken notes as I navigate our project to continue improving it. So with that,
also, to add to your point of is that what the things we're saying, all the phrases that we're using right now, okay, we're trying to be as non-technical and non-exclusive as possible, using as plain a language that we can. The reason being is that we firmly believe that consensus, the word consensus or agreement on your team, is not a technical term. It's just time invested to get all the stakeholders on the same page. Okay, I'm sure that you have done this multiple times for various other needs, okay, that are non-security related. Okay, so we are trying to build this information to be very accessible. Now, at any point, if you feel that you're confused about some terms, some things that we're saying, please, we ask you to come back to us and ask questions. We gave you an email address that, or you could just call your RSM and engage them in that clarification. We're happy to do that. So yeah, pass it back to you, Dov. No,
perfect. With that, Bill, if you could throw up the second poll. We like to hear back from everybody, as we say each time, and we learn. And
can't, because more than one device is logged into this account. Are you able to launch it from your end? You're a co-host.
Maybe
let me turn off the screen sharing. Hold on.
Beautiful. And while we do that, Terry, if you want to tee up some of the Q&A, and we'll stick around if more questions come in before our end time.
All right. So first, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Ilya. Thank you, Dov. Great presentation as usual.
And Bill.
I'm one of the regional security managers, Terry Byrne. I cover Manhattan and Staten Island. Before I get into the first question, just one of the points that I want to reiterate is we several times during this presentation today said, contact your RSM with any questions, concerns, anything that comes up along this. You can always reach out to us. But remember, the most important person to ask questions about when it pertains to this is your state representative. Even if you ask us, we're going to give you advice. We're going to give you what our knowledge base tells us is right. A lot of these are difficult. They're ambiguous, especially this round of state grants. So two things. One is always ask your state representative, and always, David Pollock likes to say, think of it as like, Mother May I. So, a lot of us grew up in strict households, and, Mom, can I do this? Mom, can I do that? Oh, Mom, please. The state rep is Mom in this case. So no matter what you're doing, what project you have, what stage you are, what you want to do with it, call them up and say, hey, is it okay? And get it in writing. We emphasized several times on this about documenting everything. You might call them on the phone. It might be difficult to get them. Hopefully you can if you call them on the phone. But no matter what, follow it up with an email and say, as per our earlier conversation, so that you have documentation. One of the participants also put up, when you do research on the internet and you hit a particular web page, those are dynamic. They could change. Maybe you can't find it later. You see something in there that you're going to use, and it's part of the research you did. It's part of work that you did. Take a screenshot. It's further documentation. You're all on this call today. We met with the Community Security Initiative. I confer with my RSM. That's another step that you can record as part of your project. And on that note, one of the first questions was, and Dov, this is probably for you, when does the quarter actually start? So, you apply for the grant. It's a process, but then they talk about quarterly reports and the quarter this and the quarter that. When does the quarter actually start?
It's a great question. Thank you. And I think there's a couple pieces to it. Once your contract timeline, so not necessarily contract execution, meaning if you're a new NSGP awardee, the contract period actually started late last year. That's why the new NSGP awardees have to put their quarterly report in for the last quarter of last year. More than likely, the hate crimes grant recipients, which the grant started the beginning of January of this year. So January through March will be the first quarter, and the report we do the end of the month. So you always have that month after. So then for both grants, it's usually broken up fiscally every 3 months, and you have that month to follow up. And again, it's just like what Ilya and I are saying, the whole team's saying here. It's about making sure that progress is improving. The state wants to make sure you're moving along, so that, because at the end of the day, if things weren't done and it's last month of this, and you all of a sudden need an EHP approved and a modification, it's not going to happen. And like I saw a comment earlier on, the DHSCS, the mom here wants to help you. They want you to use your funds. So it's not a gotcha. It's to make sure things are moving along. So if they need to ping you, and we all realize the value there. So very important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if I remember, at least DHSES sends an email to to you saying, "Hey, your quarterly report is due."
Right.
So your program manager will be bugging you on this anyway. If you haven't done your contract yet, that means you don't get bugged yet until you're in the system.
Gotcha. And just I saw another question pop up on this topic. Even if not executed, that's your update. We haven't executed our contract yet. If the timeline in your contract, if you haven't approved it, there's a time frame of these grants. When it starts, so when you can start executing it, when you can start doing your EHP, and when it closes. So that timeline is fixed. Your timeline, how you navigate within it, is obviously will be based on your projects when your approvals happen. So even without an executed contract, you still have to do your quarterly progress reports, and you can say we haven't executed our contract for whatever reasons, and then your rep will know, okay, we got to help out here. Why is that an issue? But if you have not executed your contract, definitely make sure you don't get into these vendor and bidder stuff yet that we're talking about, and come back and watch the webinar, the recording.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, don't consider yourself bothering them. Just like I always tell people, if you have a question, call us. Anything, you have a problem, something's happening at the synagogue, that's what we're here for. And it's the same thing with the state representatives. It's their job, and they want to see you succeed. They're not trying to play games. They're not trying to hold the money back. They want to see that you get the money and you spend it. So don't feel like you're bothering them. That's their job. Next question, real quick, is, Dov, if you could go over again the advertisement process, keeping in mind that people like now, especially to post things in local sales groups, a lot of geographical areas, like in my county, they have Monmouth,
supermarket throwaways.
What's that?
Supermarket throwaways.
Yeah, but even religious publications. Can you reiterate the requirement versus how expansive you can actually get in terms of advertising, and keeping that in mind, what we can possibly do to get a broader reach so that people know your advertisements are out there. So requirement versus what you actually can do.
Gotcha. No, that's a great way to put it, Terry. For the requirement side, and maybe next week I'll post up again a screenshot from the DHSES slide. So if any, you all should have emailed from the state and links around about seeing the actual slides that DHSES provides, and they kind of spell out what is not okay. But Terry, you presented it well. What's the requirement, and what else can you do? The requirement is that geographically broad type of paper. That's the term. That's a word I'm putting on it. Meaning, if it's Manhattan, it's the whole Manhattan, not just plumbers of Manhattan or synagogues of Manhattan, right? It's everyone in that catchment area. So if you're trying to differentiate what paper fulfills the requirement, maybe it's just Upper West Side, so it captures the whole Upper West Side, not just a specific group detail, specified within that area. So it captures everybody broadly. No one's missed or not missed by the technical reach of the paper. On top of that, there's no issue with doing additional ads, whether you want to put it on a social media type forum or you want to find like a Jewish specific paper that vendors look at. That's okay to supplement, but you got to make sure for the rules of the grant to follow their procurement guidelines first, and then everything else will be supplement. Just a website alone, I'm not familiar. I see Nextdoor. I'm not familiar with what that is specifically. If it's a publication, it should suffice for the requirement. If it's just kind of like what's like old Craigslist, that probably would not suffice. It could supplement, but won't meet the requirement. Same thing though, whatever way you do it, keep yourself anonymous as much as you can. You don't want to tell people, hey, we're missing good front doors. We don't advertise that. So, definitely keep that in mind as you go through the other avenues. You put on your own Facebook page, right? School ABC, have no security. We need security, So just be mindful of what we're putting out there.
Thanks, Dov. So, Ilya, you talked about trying to get all the bidders and team members available at the same time. It seems like that would be a hard thing to do. Can you talk about that a little bit?
No, if you've isolated your scope, and let's say we're talking about door hardware, for example, upgrading your locks, right? You've identified 3 vendors, bring them to the table. Or if you're talking about your upgrades to electronic systems like access control, media surveillance, and intrusion detection, right? You found 3 vendors, bring them to the table. This is a very common, very standard practice around New York City and in most other large communities. And so I'm speaking not just with my wishful thinking hat. I want you to use that process, but I'm also speaking from experience. I've managed large projects across New York City on multiple occasions, and this process is what is followed. Okay, so the vendors and who provide these types of implementations, they all know that there likely will be a pre-bid meeting. They even ask about it sometimes. Once they've replied to the ad, they said, when are we doing the site walkthrough? They just call it differently, but you control the agenda of your pre-bid meeting. You say, no, you sit down at the table first, and then we'll walk the site. Okay, so explain, have it for the introduction, and then go walk the site. But this is a standard practice. I'm not inventing it. This is not my registered trademark. I'm simply sharing with you how New York City, for the most part, does it.
And what does it say if they don't want to comply? Obviously, yeah, there are some challenges making it work, but like Ilya said, this is standard practice. They will respond, and you've probably seen it for any of you who've been through the grant process. When's the walkthrough? But if they fight against it too much, what does that mean? So just keep that in mind too.
All right, here's a rather involved question. You guys can probably read it along with me. So this facility is upgrading their access control and more. They're doing doors in service of having one vendor in charge and not have the integrator or DERPA. You know what? This is a rather complicated question. We'll take this. This is Faye.
Why don't we give that question to the RSM?
Yes.
But
Faye, we're going to refer this question to your RSM. It's a lot involved. There's a lot of information here, so we're going to hold on to this question, and we'll give it to your RSM. And it could be me. I don't know what jurisdiction you're in. We'll get back to you on that one.
Brooklyn.
Yeah, Adam and I have definitely worked with Faye. We look forward to it. We'll keep navigating, maybe even pull Ilya in to make sure we get you the best answer on this one. And these things do get technical, so thank you for putting this out there.
Going back to ads real quick, classified section. I don't think you can use that. Is that correct?
That's a good question, Helene. They don't.
I know it's usually in the legal notices.
Yeah, I've seen it in there, so I think that definitely suffices. If you're not sure, ask mom, right?
Yeah.
I definitely think that suffices. You're advertising it in the right. It's more the paper where you're advertising in the time frame versus where it doesn't need to be a front page advertisement if that's what you're like. It doesn't have to be those little nugget. A classifieds. I've definitely seen that, so it should suffice.
All right, we're getting close to time here, but I'm going to throw one more in there. It's not really a question; it's more of a statement. But Dov, perhaps you could, and this is also for Ilya, when you put this out there that you're doing an RFP, we always say have a generic address, and one of the reasons for that is we don't want people bothering you at your regular address. We don't want them calling you on the phone. One of the participants made a comment that if I was a bad guy, I'd look for these ads to identify weaknesses. Can you comment on that?
Sure. I think we even mentioned that on this webinar a couple times, and David just wrote back a response. Make that anonymous Gmail. The advertisement should not. I'm going to take credit for this. Sorry, I don't usually. When DHSES put out their template 10, 15 years ago about what the advertisement language was, I fought back. I said, hey, don't put email here. Specify it should be a generic. Just make a new Gmail. Security bids 1, 2, 3. That's probably taken by now. But as much as what it should be is saying we're in this county. That's as deep as you necessarily need to go. Keep it generic. Like I was just saying a minute ago, we don't need to advertise. We don't have guards. We don't have hardened doors. We don't lock our doors. Right? Let's definitely not do that. To be honest. We even at CSI, and as long as I've been working with David, it gave us agita every time the elected officials would announce the winners of the grant. They need to take their credit. They push. There's a lot of funding here, so definitely kudos and thank you to them. But there's a yin and yang. So we always fought back against publishing the awardees of these grants. Same concept. So thank you.
All right, I think that's it for the questions. I'm going to turn it back over to you guys to close this thing out.
Hi, I'm the nominated closer. What I want to do is I want to thank Bill, Dov, Ilya, and Terry for another terrific session. I hope everyone is finding this useful, and let us know if you want to, any specific topics covered. Item number 2, again, continue to consult with your regional security manager and your New York State program manager. Direct questions to those parties. Another thing that we have not mentioned, or at least we haven't mentioned enough, is when you get the bids back and you see, for example, in cameras or access control system, you see various brands. We've mentioned that there's some brands that are, not allowed. That's important, but CSI subscribes to a website called IPVM, which is essentially the consumer reports of the security industry. And we can send you reviews or comparisons or whatever on video cameras and access systems and alarms, etc. So, when you're asking us about various items, ask your RSM, hey, is this camera better than that camera? With that, I'd want to thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.